Yeah, sure. So I joined Sam in 2012. I'd worked for about 5 different landscape directors, including Martha Schwartz, and did projects like Stonehenge, and was big in Libya for a while until the Arab Spring, which was very disappointing. So while Sam was busy doing his exterior architecture, I was trotting around the globe having lots of fun, And then he sort of said, "Oh, do you want to come and join me?" And I went, "No, not really." And the wife said, "Well, give it a go and see what could happen." So we went from, was it 4 people, I think, in a freezer box to last year we were 52 and working all over the planet, which was great. Yeah. So our companies, so when you start your own company, you can make the rules. Yeah. So, always reading things like, your cousins talk about the All Blacks, no dickheads and everybody sweeps the sheds and all that sort of stuff. So we were able to form a company around the key ideals that were really important to us around landscape architecture and the environment. Bearing in mind, the first practice I started in Christchurch, I only planted native plants, only because that was the only ones I knew. I didn't really want to use anything else. But actually, that's a really important fact that's character into what we do now. So we do a wide range of everything from strategic master planning, including large-scale planning applications for anything to 5,000 homes, new science campuses, big green infrastructure projects that last 50 to 100 years. Which are really interesting because when you deal with the context we're dealing with, they're quite challenging. There's a lot of history and there's a lot of narrative to sort of do as well. We have so there's a wide range of stuff that we do, right down to small detail considerations, including Sam's silver medal with the gold rim from Chelsea, wasn't it? Something like that. Yeah. So
the Manchester City.
So it's everything from double XL down to small, which is really good. We, as a sort of progressive practice, we embrace new technologies. So we work mainly in 3D now. So we're pretty much 70% Revit, I think, to AutoCAD, as well as using Rhino and Grasshopper and a whole range of things. So it's really important for us that we have always retained a cutting edge in how we produce stuff, but actually they are just tools. They are not things you design with. They're just tools you use to convey information, which is really important. So thanks, Ed. So what do we do? Where have we been? Well, we've been pretty much everywhere, actually. About 4 years ago, after yet another terrible Tory government ruined the economy, we decided that we needed to get overseas again, and we'd always worked overseas, actually, which was good. So we started picking up work in the Middle East. So that was Oman, Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. And so we were quite big, and actually you'll see some projects we've done there. And that was really challenging because they were asking us to do things we hadn't done before, work in certain ways we hadn't worked, including things like COBE information inside RIBA to be able to do sustainability metrics, which was really challenging. But we took that on, and we conquered it, and we became one of the first practices in the UK to do that, which gave us a real cool market advantage over everybody else, which is great. Yeah. And then after that. 2 years ago, we were big in Eastern Europe. So we were Slovenia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, where we were on a design competition, Croatia, and Sam was working in Switzerland. Yeah, that's right, which is great. And then this year seems to be the year of Africa, where we're working in Ethiopia and have a project in Kenya and looking up in Tanzania as well. So for some reason, someone thinks we're good enough to go and do these things, which we always find quite challenging because we're quite about what we do. But actually, when you stand back and look at the work we do, you can kind of understand why they want to get us involved. So we work with some of the best architects, Big, Zahas, Fosters, which is great, as well as some really sort of key high note clients as well. So from very small, humble beginnings, both of us, you Peel Forest and I come from the West Coast, we've managed to, cleave something which has actually started to have a bit of a global appeal now, which is great.
And we have our London studio and Manchester as well. So we've been in Manchester for 10 years. And from there, we cover the north, west, northeast, and we ventured into Scotland once or twice. But we have a good sort of base of work across the UK primarily. And this is the current sort of senior team that we have. And we've got Tessa at the top right. Associate Director is a SoLA graduate. And I think that's all on that sheet at the moment. Yeah. So we've won a few awards over the years, but we don't need to dwell on that. But it's just to make ourselves look good.
So you don't read any of that.
Don't actually read it. So we've got 4 ethos points that we'd like to sort of just briefly cover. The first of which is critical regionalism, which is something Leighton has coined, because he does make up a lot of good words.
Well, no, I actually borrowed it off Simon.
I know,
He
exactly.
introduced it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's where it's Pace read a bit of theory every now.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? What we kind of like to draw out from this when we present to clients or when we present to anybody in particular here is it is about the place, it is about the brief, it is about the people. So it's ultimately about the combination of all of the factors that go into making a great place. So the three examples here on the board are a scheme called Kampus in Manchester, which is a brief. The brief was very much to create a unique environment in the urban infrastructure which you discover and would like to return to and have no idea how it got there. And that's been a hell of a success. 245 Hammersmith Road is a campus environment on podium in Hammersmith in London, very much a set piece, componentry based, bought in and plug and play in terms of its aspect. And on the bottom is in the City of London, which has very stringent design codes on materiality, on types of planting, on seating availability, and in terms of the limitation of a very limited palette, if you like. So all three have been equally successful. All three have a completely different brief, all of which have three different responses. And that, for us, is a really important part of what we do. We don't have a signature style. We don't have a standard way of drawing. We don't have what we, for CAD and for Revit we do. But in terms of graphics, in terms of presenting, they are very much unique to the project and to the people working on it. So we try not to repeat what we do in any of our work. And this is another one in Manchester, which has been a great success. That's combining an old and a new structure in a mill environment for residential.
Okay, social space engineering. So people are central to what we do. You know, design is a process of conveying meaning. So design literally means to call out signs and lesson, and actually we need to tell narratives and stories through our design thing. But putting people at the centre of that process is really important. So we design a lot of spaces to think about what people actually do, and that's everything from looking at the demographics, what time of day are people going to be there, what are they going to do when they're there, and how can we actually maximize, especially in urban environments, that sort of multiplicity of uses there. So social space engineering is really about designing space for activities, animation, curation, and activation. So what can you do in that space on a Tuesday morning when there's no one there? What can you do in that space on a Saturday afternoon when there's 600 people there in a movie theatre and various other things go? The example on the side is Agora in Budapest in Hungary, where we were given a master plan of this overscaled Eastern European sort of size monolithic massive plaza. And to make it more people friendly, we thought, well, what can we do? Well, the first thing we did was reduce the scale. Let's just reduce the scale, bring it down, make it actually work to a human scale. Second thing was, well, how are we going to use this space? So we did a whole lot of scenarios around, could be a market, could be a movie theatre, could it be an ice rink in winter, could it be a sandpit in summer? Can you have Budapest Fashion Week there? But I have no idea what that is. And then we just model those things. So we model them, we draw them and say, what does it look like? Yeah. Then we introduced the idea of this water feature that has 4 different states. So on a Tuesday morning, it's completely flooded. You can see in the bottom there with some jets, so it's actually nice. And that water animates and activates that space. But you can drain it across 4 different ways, so you can actually do various things. And so you can program that space to do something really different. And that's about how you manage space for people and get people to use it and experience it so it has different personalities through time.
And it has actually been built, even though this is CGI. But the funny thing is, water doesn't look that blue in real life, so it's quite grey and reflective of the sky at the time. But it has been built. So then, urban ecological pioneers is definitely one that you've coined, but it's something that we use. So that's embedding and ingraining ecology and biodiversity into the built environment, of which we're a big part of in terms of what we can do, both in terms of hard and soft landscape responses. So the 3 images here, combination of planting typologies. At top is Kampus, middle was the show garden at Chelsea, which we did for the Manchester City Council. All of those plants returned to Manchester to 2 different parks, so they've all been planted subsequent to the show in 2019. And the bottom one is this building, into insect and bird hotels into our schemes. So I think from our point of view, about 7 or 8 years ago when we started talking about this and actually doing it in a more meaningful way, policy in the UK has caught up. So in London, we have a thing called the urban greening factor, where you have to have an improvement of the biodiversity, planting and returning of water into the soil quotient. It's a quotient that you get to 30 or 40% of your site coverage. And we have then subsequently the UK over overall has got the biodiversity net gain policy, which is every scheme has to have a biodiversity net gain across it. And that is, I guess we think we're ahead of the curve. I think probably were, but now policy has caught up with where we were and what we were doing.
Well, there's a couple of other considerations. So of course we're in a climate adapted world, and we're designing now for climate change and trying to predict for 50 years. We're working with people like Tony Curtis at Kew to come up with a list of plants that we should be planting. And the thing that's really challenging us now is actually bioidentity. What does our natural environment look like in 20 years? Because it may not look like what it looks like now. And so how can we actually start to plan for that and integrate species so actually you can make sense of the natural world? We like to think we're the inventors of something we call vegetative semiotics, which is basically trees that tell you what's going on in the world. They tell you when it's raining, and they tell you when it's dry, but they tell you which way to go, like cabbage trees do across the Canterbury Plains. They make sense of the world for you, yeah, and that's really important. So we use planting as a way to make you move in space, to understand it, to know where you go in, where you go out. You know, the Scandinavians are great because they would always have light birch trees at the front to say, "Yeah, come on in," and then they'd have dark ones around the back say, "Don't dare come around this way." Yeah. So that's an idea of how you use vegetation that's really important. I suppose that all then links back to thinking about how we can make a better world in terms of biodiversity, climate resilience, and climate adaptation. And that's a real challenge for us as a profession at the moment to get our heads around it. And it's something we can't do by ourselves. It's something we have to do cross-professionally, working with horticulturists and a range of other people. Yeah.
You're back on.
Am I back on? Yeah. Okay, and then probably the last one's really about our impact on the environment. So it's really important to us if we take any scheme that we leave it in a better position than we found it. So we coined the term natural chemistry, which is we find if we work with natural systems or the ideas of natural systems, whether it be forage systems, whether it be drainage basins, whatever, if we integrate those systems into how we design, then we have a much more robust way of dealing with environments. So whether that's phytoremediation or whether it's sud systems or filter drains, or using the bases of roads for water catchment and permeability. We're always trying to push those ideas in our client. And for the last 10 years, it's been a real uphill struggle. But in the last couple of years, it feels like we're getting over a much bigger gap where our clients are much better informed. They want to sell properties or they want to build developments which have high degrees of sustainability around them. So it's LEED accreditation, it's BREEAM, there's a whole range of things internationally that we now deal with. And actually, then the other thing is really about carbon. So, when we started doing Battersea Power Station, all the material was coming from China, and we made a right old stink about it to see if we why do we need to just get all the stuff from China? Surely we can just get it from somewhere closer, like Portugal, or maybe from Ireland. And actually, it was the carbon story we were telling probably 15 years ago that people are now understanding now. So we've always promoted, trying to be cognizant of how much carbon we do. And we actually have a metric we also use where we can assess how much of embodied and sequestered carbon we have in our scheme, so we can tell our clients when they become carbon neutral. Not that it makes a pinch of difference to them, but it's quite interesting.
It's a good tool. So and then I think in terms of how we set up and operationally, we have we have 3 groups that assess and review work within the company. Starting on the left with the design group, which is from the beginning, concept through to detailed design, and then the technical group pick up post-concept, pre-design detailing, and then they will review everything up to the issuing of construction drawings. And then the grafters group is the in-house planting group. So that is planting review at concept and at detailed design as well. They're fundamental to how we work. So those reviews happen fortnightly, but sometimes.
Well, actually, a real nod to how we were brought up as landscape architects, in the Forbes building was we all got together and had conversations about design, and actually it was that studio atmosphere we like. So we have a single space. We don't have office. We now have an office, but no one uses it. But we sit in a single space and we work collaboratively together. Once a month, we hold something called a design festival for one day of that month. We will just review projects, and everybody from the practice can come and do it. So if you're a graduate or you're the senior director, you're at the same table making discussions about stuff. And that's how you learn about design, and exposing people to that level of understanding is incredibly important, we find. Yeah, and so we invite our clients, we invite our architects. Sometimes they show up, sample the biscuits or not. You go either way. But they're fundamental to actually improving the quality of what we do, training our staff, and actually making good projects.
Yeah, but it is still amazing how few people come out of university with any knowledge of planting. Anyhow, it's a challenge.
That's your thing.
Yeah, so it was something that was always of interest to me. I'm not sure it's of interest to everybody, but it is fundamental, I believe, to our profession. But we're trying to help the people who work for us who aren't that good with plants to make them better.
Well, projects.
Sustainability important, but BIM Revit is a fundamental part of what we do. So we mentioned that already. Okay, projects. There we go. So this is something from 2011 as a project was the Battersea Power Station. So bottom left is an overall view of it all, and on the top part of it is phase one, which this image here is of. So it's a 45-acre site. It's a grade 2 listed structure. It's the power station itself covers 6 acres, so it's quite a large building, and it has 4 very distinctive chimneys, which are 50 metres tall each, but the building is about 55. So they top out at just over 100 metres at the top of the chimneys. And it's right next to the Thames, and it used to consume about 20 million tonnes of coal per annum and generated a hell of a lot of electricity for London. All of the smoke didn't actually come out of the chimneys. It ran through a sequence of kilometres worth of filtration in the ground, and only steam came out of the chimneys, and all pollutants went into the river. So that was great. So the Thames has been pretty much dead and sterile, or was, for about 50 or 60 years. It was finally decommissioned in 1954. It was fully operating from 1932. 1932 to 1954, 2 chimneys, 1954, 4 chimneys, 1983, it stopped. And between 1983 and 2011, it was empty. And then we began the process of uncovering and revealing the different phases. So phase one is here. That's the top of the image. I don't know how this pointer works, but there you go.
Like that.
There you go. Yeah. And then from that process, that's Leighton and I worked together on this. So that's the building here. That's phase one up on the left. When we first came into the project, surrounding the power station was a moat, or it was about 2.5 acres of water. So inside that circle was a thing called the halo. And so Raphael Vinoli, who was the master plan architect, he was very keen on it being retained. It was a fundamental part of his scheme. And we went to great lengths to not only convince him, but also the local authority who had also already permitted it and outlined to get rid of the water, because 2.5 acres of water treated with the smell of chlorine, be very cold on a windy, shady, and wet London day. It would be even more repellent, and it didn't really allow people to get up to the power station to connect with it. So we eventually convinced Raphael Vinoli and then Wandsworth Council and then the GLA that we could add planting to that. So that has been a really important part of what you see here. So this would have been water along the bottom here. So there's a little bit of water left in the scheme, but fundamentally it's about planting and it's about allowing people up to and connecting with the power station. Another part of the scheme, so we had an overall role in the master plan. We had opportunity to deliver phase 2 around the power station, and then there was a competition for the jetty, which is on the river at the front. So this was an international design competition. We partnered with some architects called DRMM, and we won it. It's still not yet been realised. It's a shame. These things happen, but it was about repurposing the jetty for its original purpose of, as I said, 20 million tonnes of coal per annum were hoisted off the river through the series of cranes and conveyor belts, fed into the power station, and then turned into electricity. So we wanted to put a temporary structure and meanwhile use, but also a permanent structure onto the jetty itself, and then provide for it to have another life, but with all of the componentry parts that made up the original, which were those big cranes. Those big cranes have been taken away and still have not yet been returned, which is a real great shame.
Living, so we have a housing crisis. I think we've had a housing crisis in the UK ever since I've been there, really. So nothing really changes. They just can't build enough houses for all the people. So this just looks at a scheme we did in Wandsworth, which is a build trade scheme. So basically, it's institutional renting which is great for us because it actually means someone's going to pay to look after the landscape. Otherwise, no one's going to live there. Yeah? Wandsworth's quite an interesting borough. It's quite close to quite a significant river, not just the Thames, but the Wander as well.
Yeah.
So it was really important that we took the essence of those things and brought them into the scheme itself. Look, Nathan, cheers. So highly ecological scheme, always trying to create habitat and self-sustaining landscapes, thinking about can we plant gardens that don't require irrigation past establishments, so thinking about water demand, but then also doing something a little bit different in terms of the piece we did around the swimming pool, which was bringing in some large fern species, which don't always do well, but seem to be doing better now that it's warmer in London. So climate change does have its positive effects. And then really making social space for the demographic we were designing for, which is 25 to 40-year-old couples and particularly small families to live and socialise. So the whole thing is a very socialised based space. The seating arrangements, the movement zones, the tables and chairs, the cafes, and everything all work together to really promote outside living and really maximise the amount of outside space.
So then Crusader Works, this is the one, there was an image of it earlier. So this is in the wider scheme of things, is a lot of Manchester is old industrial revolution mill buildings, and this is a combination of new at the end and old either side mill buildings. So into that space was the opportunity to create a communal environment for residents only, combining hard and soft landscape. So the challenge is often the case, architects love to have grass magically growing where grass doesn't grow, but what we've managed to do is allow weeds to grow and it looks like grass. So the architects think it's grass, but it ain't. But the weeds are successfully managed to not get greater than the space they've been provided with. But it does provide this lovely link from the soft landscape across to the cloistered environment either side. And we have a light well in the middle. We have a barbecue. We have fire pits as well, not in here, not just in there, but we have informal seating. We have this very naturalistic planting. And I was in there only 3 weeks ago and it's looking impressive. It's a lovely environment. It's a very successful space. And it's lovely being able to work with old buildings as well. And so not far from there, same client, but before we did that scheme, is the one that we've talked about before, Kampus. So Kampus was the old Polytech in Manchester, opposite Canal Street, which is right behind us here. And Canal Street is very much a vibrant part of the Manchester sort of nightlife, very close to Piccadilly Station, which is in the mainline station in. And what it is, it's got a combination of an old mill building, a new build-to-rent scheme, an old academic building that's been turned into housing. And they've all come together and sort of coalesced around this central green space. We've got different ways of explaining it, but the one in which I like is that we picked up a scheme post-planning that Mekanu architects had done, and it was just a series of stripes across the plan, and it had no distinction between space that created comfortable areas to be in or what was happening at the ground floor. So all around the perimeter of that central space is ground floor activity, food and beverage and other such offerings. And what we did is we ripped up what had been done previously and created a sequence of spaces you can discover and find your comfortable space within. And all of those operators can access that with their offerings. So they have seating, they have tables, you can go and eat your pizza, you can get your delivery brought to you in that environment. The key with this is we've kept all the planting low to about sort of table height, and then the canopies start at about 2.1. So you have a very clear line of sight between the planting areas. So you can sit into a corner, still feel observed and not feel unsafe. And there is a freedom of movement and an opportunity for everyone to be able to be in the space. So people just walk through here. But more importantly, it's one of the greener spaces in Manchester that people do discover and really do want to return to. And it's made a real name for itself. You want to?
Yeah, so in most projects we do, we try and find some way to innovate or progress design thinking. And actually in this one, this is really the anti-garden. It has no real structure. There are no real straight lines. There's nothing you would say is a major or secondary space to it. But actually, it really works. And we designed this just before COVID. Then COVID showed up and it was like, actually, this is the perfect COVID garden because you're 2 meters away from everybody else. It was the perfect tonic for it, which was really, really good, actually. And and every time we go there, we seem to find our competitors there, their clients showing them around. You know, so we like to interrupt them to see if it's us that do it. But we stuck to our ethos on a number of really key points here. One was, you know, when we were on site digging, you know, we found all the cobbles. We found a lot of the big old granite slabs that we reused across the site as well. The big timber buffers that came off the side of the canal form part of the seat. So we recycled as much as we possibly could back into the scheme. So it's not a draw it and walk away from it. It's a draw it and then live the building of it to get to the end. Because without doing that, you know, it would all been covered and lost. And that really important sense of place we talk about also disappears as well.
Yeah. And we have an ongoing role helping them maintain and manage the scheme.
Right. So on the larger scale of stuff, we've been working for a number of science, some of our science clients in various places across the UK. And science projects are great because they basically go, here's a big campus area, and here's how we want the buildings, and you just get on and put the parsley around the outside. It's like, no, it doesn't quite work like that, I'm sorry. So, you know, affecting the master plan, realigning the buildings, and then trying to make it the most sustainable thing we possibly can. One of the great things about working with the science community is the high degree of neurodiversity you have in the science community. So you actually have to think about how you develop a series of spaces, whether they be active, whether they be passive, and allow neurodiverse people to make positive choices about where they want to be as well. Makes sense. Quite an integrated campus. Can I point you?
Yeah. I don't know how to get it.
Press the button and there should be a red laser coming out.
So we had existing campus building here where they made satellites, and all these buildings were proposed around the side through here. There's an existing GSK campus, so it ties back because GSK is a New Zealand company supposedly. So I've done that. So another great connection for us.
Bunnyful, yeah, and wherever.
Exactly. So we said we put the whole thing centered it all around this mega swale where we drained all the water from the site into a single filtration bed. And the idea was it was a series of gravel lens terraces that went down because we were actually over contaminated ground, so we couldn't go down so much. So we made everybody else go up and then go down. So you could actually deal with stormwater in a positive way, which was all about ecology and the rest of it. And then next to that, where we had spore, we made these mounds. So we made mounds that connected you to the sky and had trees around them. So they were like sky bowls, etc. And we really pushed as hard as we could to get big planting and biodiversity into the scheme as well. Some significant levels across the site. And that was generally how our little master plan came out. We've got all the way through to building it, and now they've decided that they're going to put some data centers on it, so we're redesigning it, which would not be the first time I picked up a project and 8 years later we've done nothing except redesign it 3 times.
Yeah.
So that's private practice.
Okay. 245.
Oh yeah, 245. So we're approached by LNG to come up with which originally a concept for what would have been. Can I have the point paper?
Yeah, I'll give
Can you
you.
steal it?
Yeah, you go.
And the plan's quite small, but I'll see if I can try and describe this. So this big red building is a building that is located somewhere in here.
Where you were?
No, it's located here. Yep. No, it's located there. That's the big red building. And so this was an existing car park structure which had reputedly, and done by one of my old bosses, reputedly the largest timber deck in the Northern Hemisphere, and it was disgusting.
Yeah.
I like to remind them about that every time I see it, which is good. And then it turned into this office building, and it was like, okay, well, what can we do with an office building? What sort of landscape can we make? So what we wanted to do is we wanted to externalize the internal workings of an office. We wanted to bring people out into the space so they could actually sit in like large outside meeting room tables, which had access to Wi-Fi, and put them into nature. So it was taking people in a environment, put them into nature. One of the major elements of what we did is this large green sloping lawn, which has a small stage at the back, but this button might just work, was actually to have a space we could activate. So they run a really great series of programs here where they have everything from inflatable television screens showing Wimbledon to string quartets in summer. And it's the largest new public space in Hammersmith in 150 years. It's incredibly successful. We needed to retain some of the former uses. So there was some weddings that happened on the space that the hotel next to it does. So we need to ensure we included that. So all that social space engineering was really important to make sure we left those spaces for people to do. Then the monolithic nature of the building we wanted to respond to as well. So we started to think about, should we just upsize everything? Should we make everything feel bigger so you feel like you're smaller? You're more immersed into the space. So we played with scales quite a bit. And then the sort of last significant thing is we were dealing with trees which are 150 years old and attempting to rotate them, which is something you probably don't have a lot of experience with, or maybe you do, I don't know. If you're out in the middle of a forest somewhere, you might do. But always incredibly tricky to try and think about how you plan for the future of a tree, how you keep its root zone around it. And in this scheme along the high street, we introduced one of the first sustainable urban drainage schemes into Hammersmith that they'd ever done. They hated it. Highways guys, I'm not doing it. I'm not looking after that. I'm not going to do this. And it took us 6 months to convince them actually you didn't have to do anything because all this is permeable and it all goes into cells and all the water collects and comes back to the tree. And eventually he did it. And now it's policy. Yeah. So we go from this point where always we have to start going, it's a really good idea. No, trust me. I know what I'm talking about. No. And then eventually they come around, which is quite good. This is a really interesting project. I mean, when I talk about how we use natural systems, this is a really good example in what would be probably one of the harshest inner city environments you can get. This is Waterloo Station along here, or the old international terminal, which is now platforms 21 to 24, something like that. And this was the building called Elizabeth House, which we were going to demolish. And we were going to build a building over 4 tube lines where we had something like 20,000 people movements an hour in peak flow, as well as tourists, as well as a whole lot of other serious considerations to deal with. The engineer came up with a wonderful suggestion where he would make the slab on the bottom and we'd hang the rest of the building and we would have an acre park in a 13-metre void, which is about 30 metres wide. And then we started thinking, well, how are we going to grow plants in this? How are we going to grow anything in there? So instantly I went back to my days of forest ecology and thought, well, this is an edge, isn't it? So why don't we think about what a forest edge is? Why don't we think about a transect between a forest edge and the middle of a forest? And why don't we find the plants that fit in there? And why don't we put those in there? Because that's a damn good idea. And that worked, which was great. And then we had to curate all these spaces. So basically they have something called the pedestrian comfort level, TFL, Transport for London do, and you have to make sure your walkways are so wide because you must cater for anything up. So I think we were planning for 18,000 people an hour to walk along the route through here. Yeah. But my client wanted to hold talks and they wanted to have people come down and commune and workshop together and have yoga days and the rest of it. And so it involved a lot of testing, modular furniture, how can you pull it down, how can you put it back, etc. And it was a really interesting exercise. We had a wonderful roofscape where we at one point we were seriously considering having sheep in the middle of the city on the roof. Yeah, that lasted about 3 months until we went back to a productive garden. So we have a 500 square meter productive garden that I think makes something like 8,500 salads a year. That is actually a metre of butternut. You just make it up and see who believes you. Someone did, which is really useful. So running tracks, fitness centres, spaces for relaxation, and again we applied this at similar principles. You can see the building. Oops, the wrong way. You see how the building tears up. Well, we thought we'd do the same thing in terms of natural. So what we wanted to do was to do lower, more arid, more alpine plants on the 32-story element, and then succeed that down to lower river terraces. So again, applying the principles of natural systems to urban environments. You want to add anything?
Well, I think and using Revit for that was pretty important. Using the structure and all of that in terms of the soil volumes, and it's the fact that it might come back.
That's a game.
So this is
we're almost there, not too many more.
Yeah. So this is very early on after planting. This is about 4 acres of roof in Turkey. So this is on the coast, Bodrum, in Turkey, and it's bringing the idea was 6 Sense is quite a exclusive sort of brand, but we wanted them to try and live within the natural environment. It's pretty hard when it's a massive structure built into the side of a hill. However, what we did is we managed to bring all of the natural planting down onto the roof. We haven't actually got an updated photo. We do need to get one, but this now just has become netted in and wedded to the landscape and to its context. So it was a massive undertaking in terms of working. The architects are from Barcelona. They were really accommodating in terms of allowing the structure to take the loading and the depths of the soil required. And what we've ended up with is, it's a fairly luxurious brand, but we've got a fairly natural landscape sitting fairly comfortably into a very manufactured sort of superstructure, what sits beneath it, but what appears above it in terms of within the landscape sits quite comfortably. And that took a lot of discussions, a lot of working with the architects, with the engineers, but a hell of a solution in the end in terms of being something to be proud of and return to.
We also seconded one of our members to site for 6 months, so he lived there, didn't he?
Yeah.
When he came back, it was totally feral.
He had gone feral. Yeah. He was living on site.
So campuses again. So this is the Harwell campus. So this is ex RAF, actually the New Zealand RAF glider outfit here in the Second World War. But a 425 hectare campus. Now, when I first came across this project, my client who ran it, they're part of something called STFC, who own the who run the Appleton Rutherford Laboratory, which is this one here, named after Ernest Rutherford, who even though Trump thinks he broke the atom first, that was actually us. So it's just a reminder about that every time we get a chance. There's no way we could do any development on this until we had actually structured a landscape that could take development. So the local authority were literally the first 2 meetings I went to, they were pulling each other's eyes out. So we developed a plan around having greenways, structural green elements. So these are 30-meter wide planting things. These 30-meter wide planting things create backdrop, so you can actually put development into it. So when you look at it from a distance, from the walkways around it, it settles into the landscape. So we were really successful at bringing that forward. And since then, I think we've done about 9 various different things. This is our team out building bug hotels because you just can't be in an office all day. It's a bit boring, isn't it? Yeah. And it's been really successful in terms of both being highly sustainable, increasing the tree canopy over the site by about 200%, and having really lovely gardens again for scientists to come out and do it. And we do things like we have micro orchards, and I was explaining to my client, we could have an orchard, and then you could get your scientists to come out, and then Adam could be Eve, and he went, and Adam could be Ian as well. It's like, well, I'm not sure what's going on. But always encouraging people out of buildings, socialising space, spaces for collaboration. We did on the campus. We also did over here the National Centre for Quantum Computing. Now I'm not even quite sure what quantum computing is, but we're talking to the scientists who do it, and it's like we're saying, well, how do you work together? It's like, well, one of them was like, well, I just have my ideas when I'm out walking. So what we ended up doing was we ended up doing a non-escapable walking route like you do at the Alzheimer's Garden. And literally they walk around in trees having conversations, and they get off, and the next site get out and they walk around. In a really successful way of getting people to collaborate around science, which was really good. This one is, so we worked with Barkey Ingles Group on the tech campus in Bratislava. So this is 10 hectares of new solar powered buildings. But my client really, and the site encompasses forest around the site, my client was really keen that we developed a landscape where his staff would come out and they could be there all day, and they didn't feel like it was working with small play as well. So across the site, we made these walking routes out into areas which were no tech pods. And this is a tech company, remember. We thought there should be places where your mobile phone doesn't ring and you can unplug. So we have unplugged spots, which is great. We wanted to have a range of things. So again, orchards and allotments, natural swimming pools, micro sports events, climbing walls, free balls areas. So a whole range of activities that people could go and do. But again, we did the whole site drains to this car park, because underneath this car park is 3 meters of gravel lens, and that takes all the water from site and then spits it all down slowly and holds it in the bottom until it releases it. We wanted to do a number of quite significant things on the site, such as create some really cool icons at the start. We had these really great design elements. This is now 4 years into the Slovakian planning system, and they called me last week and they said, okay, we're about halfway there. So I don't know whether they're ever going to build it, but hopefully. They said it's the worst system in the world. But a really interesting project, and really great to work with really forward-thinking clients and architects who really want to make a difference. And I think this is the last one, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so we're in the Middle East. So this is one of my projects now. I've signed an NDA on this. So if anybody talks about this, I'll have to shoot you. Yeah. So essentially, we got drafted in at pre-concept stage to work with ADAS out of Hong Kong, who've taken on Zaha Hadid's ski village. This thing is just bonkers. Yeah. I mean, seriously. This is a ski village in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. But you've got to remember, the Tarbuck Mountains are 3,200 meters above sea level. Yeah. So that's as high as Mount Cook. Yeah. It is cold enough that that they can retain snow for 5 months of the year, but they don't have enough moisture. So our client, in their wisdom, thought they'd build a big lake and pump salinized water up from the ocean. Now, we really struggled when we started this project because we thought, should we really be doing this? You know, is this the type of work we think really represents our brand? Yeah, we had a number of discussions about it. So it didn't always go that well. And actually, it worked out. We've made a significant difference by being inside the process and not being outside the process. So we've encouraged our client to take all the rock that he's dug up to make all these things and keep it on site, grade it, turn it into gravel, and use some of the rock and to make all his structures around it. So we're recycling all the rock on site. Originally, he was going to be bringing it in from other parts of his country. We thought it was really significant. Second thing we managed to do is actually work with them to ensure that all the water we were capturing on these roofs is returned, so that they have a cyclic water system now, which goes all the way down and pumps back up, which is really good. We work with Austrian ski experts to like design ski slopes. It's very exciting. You know? It's quite weird when you're standing on, you're standing in the middle of Saudi Arabia on the, 3,200 high meter mountain. You think, oh my God, someone's going to build something. It's just outrageous here. And that's the super weird part of it. So we designed a whole lot of plazas and spaces and hotel terraces again, making sure we're planning for activation because they want to have, in summer, it's an artificial grass slope. So it's a full year round thing. There's mountain bike tracks, hiking tracks and the rest of it. And, they're thinking they're going to be having big events. Ariana Grande's going to be there giving a concert and stuff. But I'm not quite sure they're used to the fact that actually at 3,200 meters, it can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. But let's wait and see. So they're halfway through building it.
Yeah,
from what I see at the moment.
It's under construction.
And it's one of those things where I think we've made more of a difference being inside of it than outside of it. So I think in that sense, we've done our bit. So.
Yeah. And so this is our London studio. Bottom left is Christmas a couple of years ago.
Actually, that's the pub next door, which
Yeah.
is just through this wall.
We can get Wi-Fi from our
Full
office. It's not handy. So the office view is of looking back at the Shard, City of London across the river. This is the space, and this is where we are right now. So
That's our green wall.
that's our green wall. So yeah, this is where we are, and we love being in London, but equally we are very happy in our Manchester studio as well. And we're always looking for keen, motivated, and well-trained landscape architects. So if anyone speaks to come over, come and see us. Okay. Here we go. But if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free. Or if you want to leave, equally good.
I would like to invite Naomi, if she's yes, here she is, to come up. So Naomi Wild is the director of our alumni office, and she has been very instrumental in making this award happen. So
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just a wee gift from the alumni office to you both.
Thank you.
It was so exciting last year to visit you guys in the London studio, take some pineapple lumps and peanut slabs over there. And
Always gratefully received.
and thank you so much for your presentation today. I'll give it a back. But yeah, it's amazing to think, alumni here through Lincoln and now on the world stage, and the impact that you're having worldwide is amazing. So we're very, very proud of you. So just a couple of little presents from home from us.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so we'll just take a couple of questions here, and then maybe some of the people online, there's about 100 something people who've joined, so maybe they could write some questions, and yeah, we could go through that. Anyone has a burning question? I'll start and usually throw myself under the bus. So thank you so much for a really inspiring presentation. I was actually in London like a typical Kiwi doing my OE as well, but I have an architecture background, and when I studied architecture, we did not think about landscape architects at all. We just like, just Photoshop some trees, and that's all that was the level of engagement 20 years ago. And then when I was actually working in practice in New Zealand and in London, landscape was always an afterthought. And most of the architects didn't even know what landscape architects actually do. And so you've mentioned very briefly some of the things you would like challenging a lot of the architects. Let's make more space for this. So I was thinking that maybe for the graduates, it would be nice to sort of know any challenges you guys had working with architects and how did you overcome these challenges?
Well, I married one, so then if I go on the inside, I might be able to give it. I just think you really need to have integrity around your ideas. Yeah, if you're going to challenge a design decision, make sure you know what you're talking about. Be the first thing, yeah, and be brave. You know, promote landscape. So project we haven't showed, working with the guy who was head of the RIB at the time, Simon Alford from AHMM. You know who they are. Yeah. So we had this scheme, which is a very large housing scheme on the site of a former women's prison in Holloway. Fantastic site, great history. Emmeline Pankhurst was interned there. Oscar Wilde was interned there for about 3 weeks. God knows why. And the architect had just designed these 2 massive bathtub buildings. He'd obliterated every tree. He hadn't accepted the 11-metre level change over the site. And we went to a design review panel. And I think Alison Brooks said, "Leighton, what can you do with those spaces?" And I said, "I can work within any of the dark chasms that an architect will give me." And so, as associate director, still doesn't talk to me on the back of that. But you know, but essentially, we came out of that. My client said, "Well, what would you do, Leighton?" I said, "I would do this. Yeah, I would put a ring around everything I want to keep. Yeah, and then I'm going to get this piece. I know to get from this point to this point across 11 meters, I need something this long. So I'm going to get a piece of wall." And I'm going to do this around all my trees, yeah? And then all the other bits are yours, yeah? And you have to make them work, yeah? Yeah, exactly. And that was landscape-led master planning, you know. That's the principles behind it, you know, save your assets, you know, promote landscape spaces. But it wasn't just the physical things. It was also, there were spaces that were really important to past residents, because we call them residents, not visitors. Past residents. And they were things like, there's one space where the residents of one side could yell the storyline of EastEnders across to the others because they didn't have a television. That was called Albert Square. So we still have Albert Square within our scheme, and it's a memorial space that people can come, they can sit next to the trees that they remember from when they were interned and have an experience. So it's those threads of those memories that now make this a much richer master plan to work with. So my advice would be promote the landscape elements and promote them hard and stick with them.
But also to not sound like a broken record, one thing architects don't know about, architects do think they know everything. That is something that comes with training.
Yeah.
But one thing they don't know about is plants. That's one thing as a landscape architect you should have knowledge of that they don't. Otherwise, they think they know everything. And that's just fact. I mean, architects are brought up differently, they're trained differently. They are pumped up with ego before they're there. But anyway, that's part of their training. So I think what we have to do is have ownership of something, and I think plants is definitely something you should be able to have ownership of.
That's the question.
Just a second, I'll just get them.
So our program has been strong on getting students to learn their plants for a long time and still is. I presume that you guys would have been introduced to learning your plant species here when you were students, is that right?
Yep, walking around the campus.
Yeah.
But, you know, you still have to do more.
Yeah, for sure. What I wanted to ask on behalf of the students here is, I think, Leighton, you implied that learning your New Zealand natives somehow has impacted on how you design with plants, presumably because of the plant communities that you're putting together. Is that right?
Yeah, I think if you're going to use a plant, it's got to be from the right place. Yeah. So my approach is more regionalist than, say, aesthetic in that sense. But it doesn't mean that it can't be aesthetic. So you know, I was lucky because I worked in a nursery for a year, so I know the 5 years from the deaners, which is quite useful because I don't like either of them. And then I did a forest ecology degree, so you know I spent my time in the Craigieburn Ranges and you know going on really cool mushroom field trips that I can't remember much about. You know, and so you know the basis of a plant knowledge can always be extended. Yeah, so you need to have an understanding, a basic understanding of plant communities and taxonomy, and once you have that, then I think you can understand it more.
And soil.
Yeah, we were talking about that before.
Thanks, guys, for a great presentation and lots of questions. But one I'd like to ask you, Sam, and I've got two questions, one at both ends of the process. And so if we have time, I'll come back with the one for Leighton, please. But Sam, when you went to London, you didn't have a lot of connections there, and you ended up working on a major project pretty early on. Battersea Power Station was not a small project. Could you share with the graduates, or the coming up graduates, could you share with us, how did you engage with potential clients? What was the secret of that success? Because it's clear you've got a real way with clients. What's the secret of that success?
Yeah, so as much as I've been deriding architects for the last wee while, one of the key things for me was to meet as many architects as I could when I arrived, and then from that form a relationship with them that maybe led on to some work. But in the case of the Battersea Power Station, I think Ollie was the employee. Ollie was probably employee number 7 or 8 for the company. When I employed Ollie, he and we moved the office strategically close to the Battersea Power Station, like literally across the way, because I thought one day I'd love to work there. Ollie was at a wedding the weekend before, he told me, with the CEO of the Battersea Power Station. That was the end. So I just rang straight away. I said, you met Ollie, my colleague, at a wedding. Come in for an interview tomorrow. We're interviewing landscape architects. That's how that works. So it's taking the opportunity when it arises, and it's just keeping your ear and eye open for any of those opportunities. So, yeah, I mean, it's circumstance, it's chance, but it's also making sure those chances happen and giving yourself the best opportunity. Yeah.
Right. Could I ask Leighton at the other end of the process?
Yep, sure. Just a second. So that
Thank you. Leighton, you've put a really good, appropriate emphasis upon the post-construction phase of a project. The way in which you've programmed the spaces and the way you're activating. One of the big challenges that we have is that usually involves a handover of the site to a whole new set of institutions. How do you future-proof your future planning?
It's a good question, because once you detach from your client, and your client then detaches to his operational people, you need to step over your client to make a link to them. So we do post-occupancy evaluation. We'll write to our clients and say, the cornice has taken over your planting bed and you need to rip them out. We need to do it again, and you can pay us to do it. So that's okay. Yeah. But if you don't retain the relationship, then it's very difficult. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you can design in a certain way to ensure that your designs are future-proofed. Yeah. So you're making sure that the space and capacity for what you design can be accommodated in time.
And the boring thing is writing good operations manuals. And I think it's very easy, just walking around Christchurch yesterday, even in that eastern frame, some of the planting there is turning into what I look akin to Tesco car park in the UK, where you just end up trimming it top and sides and it just turns into a hedge, a glorified hedge. If you aren't explained to properly as to how things should look or what form they should be allowed to grow into, then you just end up with this big monotonous mishmash and it just turns into an amorphic blob. So you do need to give and empower people to be able to look after plants in a certain way. And, you can write it down, you can record it, you can identify every single plant, but it's still only as good as the person looking after it. Or you'd be as robust as you can and simple as you can, and it shouldn't rely on that. But ultimately, plants grow, and you need to allow them to grow either into their completely natural form or to be managed in the correct way.
Right, we have time for one more question. Quick question. Yep.
With the urban greening factor, I'm interested to know how that informs your design. I'm assuming it's mandated, is it, in the UK that you have to reach a certain score factor, and in London, right? And then to what degree does that like, I guess, drive your innovation, and you have to start replacing things with what, and I'm assuming the role of Revit having the embedded data to know what your score is at any moment to be able to, oh, we need to change this because of this. Like, I've seen a few solutions where it's like, we have to slap a green roof on the top of this building because we're not going to meet our mandated score. Like, I'm interested because New Zealand often lags behind a lot of the world in terms of trends and stuff. Like, what trends have you guys maybe informed or come across to respond to those as a solution?
Couple of things have changed in recent years, and one is Grenfell, which was that horrible fire, has changed Building Safety Act, or introduced it into the UK, whereby no living material can be on the facade of a residential building. That's also now extending to commercial buildings, so that no facade can actually have any organic material on it. So that was a way of scoring high. The other thing is that at the outset of a project, if you are putting a green roof, but green roof scores really low, it's like the lowest almost. So if you are putting planting on a building, you need the depth. So it's really about the volume of soil that can then support the right amount of growth. So that becomes an engineering solution, a build-up solution, an M&E solution for what's passing through the structure beneath. It becomes an architectural response. So we get involved earlier to say, to get to score, you need to allow the structure to support all of the aspects that need to go with it. So it's a really, for us, it's early identification of where the issues might arise to support the design team, which means making architects and engineers respond to the UGF, the urban green factor, which is, it's good for us because it means we're actually a key part of the project from the outset. Any more?
Yeah, it's an interesting process. You have a crack at it, you don't get the score right, you're gonna, am I going to get this? Yeah, how am I going to improve it? Then you'll think, well, I can get more value for this than this. But it's quite well weighted towards natural systems. So if you're draining into like a wet depression or a wet meadow, you'll find that scores generally better than, say, a grass area or things like that. So there is some sense in there, but it is interesting, this process. Yeah.
Very much, Leighton and Sam. That's been incredibly inspiring. I think, a chance for us to kind of lift our eyes up from our daily grind here at Lincoln and studies and so on, and look at what you've done around the world and take that away with us. And just to say, we're very proud of you and thank you for coming to speak to us and giving inspiration to the students. And have a talk to them if you're thinking of getting to London and looking for a job.
Cool.
So thanks again, and good luck for the big day tomorrow.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone.